What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to ask the simple question, will there be a Dead Island 3? Talk a little bit about that procedure, if we're going to get it or not. As I did in the review, you may be saying, well, Alex, this is kind of weird seeing your face. It probably is, but the Dead Island gameplay, notoriously, if you've seen it online, has started to get demonetized and stuff on YouTube. So to play it safe in all ways, it's just gonna be you and me, for this video. But let's ask the question, will Dead Island 3 happen? Honestly, I believe it will. I think the answer is yes. Now you could say, well, of course, when you make a Dead Island 1 and 2, there's Riptide, of course. Technically, there's already been 3. But when you make a numbered series, 1 and 2, obviously 3 is definitely possible. It's maybe something that you would want to do. So you could say, well, that's a stupid question. Well, in reality, though, it's been so long since Dead Island. There's no guarantee. Now, we'll talk about the sales for Dead Island 2 as this video goes on. It's doing well. There's no guarantee it's going to continue to do well. Also, we had, almost a decade difference and jumping studios and cancellations and stuff. So this is not a simple case of like a Star Wars Fallen Order, and then Jedi Survivor. Obviously, you're going to get a third game. It's built for a trilogy. They basically said as much, but that's quite obvious. Dead Island has been so much more messy that it's kind of up in the air. So let's talk about a few different elements. We can start with the sales. Let's start with kind of outside the game. We'll talk about if the game leads up to it, but outside of the game, this game's done well, right? So in the first 3 days, it sold 1 million units, which the comparison to Dead Island 1 is that in the first week, it didn't even sell 1 million. It sold 1 million. It shipped out 1 million units to places to then sell them. So this game in 3 days beats pretty easily what the first game did in about a week. That is great news. Now, as I said, and it's not to be mean, but it's to be really just aware of the situation. It's doing great, and I hope it continues because I actually really like this game. I did a review a few days ago. Go check out that review. But at the same time, 1 million is probably not enough, right? Like, the sad thing is we're in the day and age, well, you could say maybe 1 million was never good enough for like any game. In 2023, with the budgets that games are now having, right? Selling 1 million, I highly doubt is enough to recoup the money. And also, when you're talking about a third game, whatever business meetings they're, I'm sure, having internally, you got to look at the success of 2 and say, well, number one, can we even replicate that in 3? But also, you'd ideally want it to keep growing, right? So you would look at what 2 does and say, okay, well, can 3 do this? Well, maybe it can. And then if it can, well, okay, we'll green light it. We'll let you do it, right? So that's one of the biggest things to me, that although it's doing great in the first week, this thing probably needs to get 3, 4, 5 million. Like, if we get a number over the next couple months that said Dead Island 2 has sold 4 million units, I'd feel pretty okay about a third game. You know what I mean? I think it needs to do more. I don't think 1 million is enough, but it's definitely a fantastic start and probably better than they thought. Probably, but I mean, you could look at Dying Light as an example that these zombie games can sell extremely well, be very profitable, and be a franchise, but you don't know that Dead Island's going to do it, right? So outside of the game, I think that works. Let's talk about one other thing outside of the game, the studio. So, like, it's finally found a home, right? This studio has made it their own. Now, I wonder how much they kind of inherited. They have said, like, pretty much whatever they wanted to do with this game, they did, and it is their vision. I believe that. I'm just kind of curious from the, outside looking in. What did they get shipped? Like, when the game pulls up at their door, when they start working on it in the studio, what does it look like then versus what does it look like now? What kind of things did they add in? I assume they added in like 90% of what we got, to be honest, if not more. And of course, the reason you bring this up is because, again, as I said, for Star Wars and other things, it's not as easy as studio has the game. It's their franchise. They've made all of them. Of course, you're going to continue the franchise, so of course you'd make the next game. This studio inherited it after 2 other studios. It was dropped from them, right, or given away. So there's no guarantee, but I think it worked really well. Again, it's hard to know 100% of what this team put into it, but I think the writing, it's debatable. Obviously, people online are talking about the story and stuff. I actually liked it. I think it fits Dead Island. I think it was a well-written story for what it was supposed to be. It looks visually good. It ran really well. I think they understand Dead Island. And I've said it before, like, I'm not even the biggest fan of Dead Island 1 or Riptide, but I feel like I kind of have an understanding of what Dead Island is. I feel Dead Island 2 is Dead Island, and I think you can honestly give a lot of credit to the developers for that. I think if there is a studio to make the next one. This is, you don't just randomly shop it. This would be the studio to do it, right? So you got that solved. It's a little bit more messy than what you would normally start out with another game franchise, but I do think it's kind of sorted out. Then you get to the game. So the only thing we can really talk about in regards to the game, setting up the third game, probably is the ending, right? Now there's some bread trails throughout the game that there could be more going on and stuff. And so we can spoil it a little bit more. I mentioned this in the review that I thought the ending, like the last 5 minutes, was rather rushed and just felt like they kind of cut it off. We can maybe talk about the specifics a little bit more in this video. So if you haven't, watched or played the game, you could turn away now. I'll be flat out honest. I forgot there was DLC. So before making this video, I looked it up. I made sure, I remembered. And the DLC is going to contain, I believe they said, like 2 story missions, or it's going to have like another arc basically with the story. And you imagine that picks up after the ending of Dead Island 2. So, there's a way, I suppose, to deal with like the situation at hand that your character, I was playing as Amy, whatever your character is. There's easily, I think, a way for the DLC to wrap it up. I've seen other videos talk about the story / like ending explained, right? And in those videos, I saw a lot of other people comment and say, well, yeah, the story can set up a third game. I think it could. If you left it right there, I think you could pick up a third game and just kind of carry it over. However, I do agree with the idea that it does feel like this game was kind of ended to set up DLC. The ending was to set up DLC, not necessarily Dead Island 3. Now, I'll say, as a critique of the game, I don't like that. I've never liked games. That was a huge era of games, maybe like the early 2010s, right? The PS3, 360 era, where games would just kind of stop. They would end, and you need to get the DLC to figure out what happened. It's not awful like that, but it's definitely not in the greatest spot where it's like, well, I would have preferred, those DLC missions. Maybe it just have made them story, main missions as part of the game, and we wouldn't be in this trouble. So, I do think you could go, again, with the ending of 2 and just make it 3. I feel like the DLC is going to be the thing that ends it. So when it comes to the next game, I guess the tough thing is this. Do you carry over, like, all the things that happen here? Because these are, some of these, I believe this game takes place, like 10 years after Riptide, so they don't have to be back-to-back. They don't have to take place like a month later. They also don't need to take place with the same characters. Now, I honestly found myself really liking my character. I mean, I picked Amy. I thought there was something with her voice acting where it's like, I think she's going to be good. I loved it. I think she's a really good actress, whoever plays Amy, and I think she's a good character. I would imagine all the characters are somewhat equal, right? I would like to carry them over. At the same time, carrying over, 6? Is there 6 characters in this game you could play as? That is a lot to potentially carry over into the next one. So I would imagine, like, the theme of what happens in this game, I think you could probably carry over, like the Newmans and stuff. I think you could probably carry that into the next one. The idea that your character is going to carry over, I highly doubt it. And that would just be a prediction of mine. So I do think we would get a third game. I think it could play around with some of the things that they talked about and were showing us in Dead Island 2. But it probably would be kind of like from fresh blood, learning about it. The thing that you always just have to deal with is like, the trope with this game is that you get bit and you're kind of special, right? So you can kind of take it. Would you have to do that again in the next game? And that's already a reused trope, right? Oh, you're a special you can get bit and not die or, not turn. This game messed around with it a little bit more, which I actually did really like, but it is a reused thing. So that is the one weakness. If you want a clean slate, new cast of characters, there's no guarantee you're going to be able to match Dead Island 2. And then also you're going to pretty much have to do the same thing over again. So maybe you do. Maybe you just import. You just do it again, and you just have all these characters appear in the next game. So I do think a Dead Island 3 will happen. I do think largely it depends on the sales. And, again, it sells 1 million. That's great. If it were to fall off a cliff like tomorrow, which, with Jedi Survivor, how much do these games impact each other, right? Does Jedi stop people from buying Dead Island? Does Redfall, does Zelda, right? It's tough. It's tough to actually know, but maybe it does. If this game were to completely stop and it sells like 1.5, I don't really think that's enough. And also, you got to think, they're probably thinking this was a nightmare. This was a nightmare to put together over maybe not the developers, but like to get Dead Island 2 to release to the public. You definitely don't ever want to do that again. So you probably want overwhelming success to show, okay, we got a good foundation. The studio's good. We trust them. They're going to make 3, and we'll ship it in 4 or 5 years. It's not going to take 50. It's going to take 4 or 5 years. That's ideally what you would want. So hopefully this game continues to sell over time, and then that happens. I think it's pretty possible. I think these zombie franchises, Dying Light has proven it. They can last long term if you want them to. Dying Light can last as long as you really want it to. And then when you don't really feel like it anymore, you can just make the second one and make that last forever. So they have something very special. And I don't think it needs to be exclusive to them. I think it would work for pretty much any zombie game. Obviously, quality needs to be there. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure you're subscribed, bell icon turned on, and I'll see you all on the next one.